Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us in Capture Setups from Scratch to Marathons. My name's Lurkjan.
I'm Dark Aries.
And getting right into it today, we're going to be talking about audio and video terminology and equipment. We hope to improve your understanding of audio and video chains and sort of how the capture takes place, as well as present several upgrade paths to kind of help you find what your capture needs are, and hopefully have you find attendees walk away with some new knowledge and equipment to check out.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot that we could go over when it comes to setups, video setups with capture and everything. So in trying to be the most informative that we can, we're keeping to just the capture portion. So you're not going to learn about how to use OBS or how to process your video or anything like that. It's just strictly the capture portion. So yeah.
Yeah, so getting right into it, just sort of who are we, why should you trust anything that we say? We're both North American speedrunner assembly staff. We've been doing that since 2016. I myself, I'm a speedrunner. I did Castlevania Chronicles on Monday here. I've done a number of games since 2012, streaming since 2013. I've been at various events, as you can see, and I've got my master's in college student personnel administration.
So I don't have a master's, unfortunately, so I have to kind of up myself in other ways, but I'm a Puzzle General community leader since 2015, been speedrunning since about 2013. I'm actually a professional AV technician, though, for PSAV, so I've done big events like Pro Gloves, which is a big charity boxing match, for example. I've also run tournaments like Mystery Puzzle Challenge. I'm a computer programmer, that's what I went to school with, and I'm also bilingual in English and Polish. And I also have things like this going for me.
Yeah, short video for you.
Oh, went over it.
Comprehensive stuff, and Dark Aries knows what he's talking about when it comes to, especially like the data path stuff. And I'm telling you, the stuff that Dark Aries sent me runs counter to what Steve's found and what you found. He gets really good analog captures directly from the data path, and I don't know. And he's doing the same bandwidth tests that Steve was doing, or that Bob was doing. And visually, there's a stark contrast between Bob's captures and his captures, and he's obviously doing something right. So a lot of people were saying, well, since the data path sucks for SD bandwidth, for directly interfacing that, why bother with the data path? But because of Dark Aries, I'm moving on with it because he's showing me that the data path is clearly capable of doing very high quality captures of 240p content. So
if you don't know who those people are, they are very prominent members in the RGB and retro console communities. That's Retro RGB, who runs a website that maybe you may have come across if you're trying to figure out the best capture for consoles. There's DB Electronics, who creates multiple hardware for different consoles. The next two people are HD Retrovision. They create those component cables for Super Nintendo, Genesis, and multiple consoles. And the person who was actually talking was Voltar, who also creates mods for consoles to enable RGB cleanup signals and everything like that. So these people are fairly high in the community.
So getting into it, you want to capture some video games. First thing we need to sort of dispel is that there's really not going to be a fits-all need sort of capture setup. We hope to provide you at least some sort of basic foundation for where you want to go, depending on where you're at and what equipment you have. Everybody's captures are going to be different, and your setup is going to have to kind of adapt depending on what you want to go for.
Yeah, and I mean, what works necessarily for us might not work specifically for you. That's why you'll notice everybody always has, well, this works for me, but it's not going to mean that it's going to work for you. And what we are going to be describing is what we are confident in recommending because we have used it ourselves, or we have a lot of people who we trust who have also used that equipment, and we can confirm that if you get it, you will have a working result.
Right. So first, what we want to show is a video from the slow-mo guys that sort of shows what is even happening on the TV. What is it that we're capturing? So a couple segments here.
Slowed all the way down to 2500 frames a second, you can now differentiate each individual frame being built from top to bottom. It takes an extremely fast camera to see that each frame is built line by line from top to bottom. but it takes an even faster camera to see that each line is drawn from left to right. Slowed down to 28,500 frames a second, we're now seeing glimpses of that, but we do need to go even slower. This is now 118,000 frames a second. I'm going to put the stats up for you here so you can see the actual amount of time that it took. And you can see now that the line is being drawn from left to right on the screen. Now at 146,000 frames a second. To gain perspective on just how slow this actually is, you can see the exact time I shot this. So this is hours, it was just past midnight, 23 minutes, 41 seconds. This is a tenth of a second, a hundredth of a second, 1,000th of a second, or a millisecond. And then over here you've got a 10,000th of a second, a 100,000th of a second, and this unit here is the millionth of a second, or a microsecond. We are now at 380,000 frames a second as our recording frame rate. That is...
So that just kind of goes to show how analog video works on older CRTs or tube TVs. When you see it broken down like that, it makes a lot more sense as to why you can end up having issues with dealing with analog capture. It's literally just a very fast signal, and it's often out of specifications, which is why you can lead to issues with capturing it.
Did I skip it?
No, that's the right slide.
We're now looking at the subpixel level. A pixel is made up of 3 subpixels, red, green, and blue. RGB, you may have heard that before. And this creates the illusion of different colors. By dimming and brightening different subpixels to different intensities, this screen can create the illusion of literally millions of different colors. When all 3 are lit to full brightness, you get white. When all 3 dim, you go through gray all the way down to black. So if green dims away and red and blue are still lit, then you go into magenta, purple, that sort of area, and that's how the colors are made. So every time on your TV you're looking at a white image, you're looking at tons of blue, green, and red lights. They're just so small, they look like white to your eye.
And then just the next one is just to show that's the same sort of deal on a CRT.
Vomit. It's the same situation, just entire blocks, and they're bigger.
So that's kind of what we're trying to capture. That's the idea. So now let's get into some terminology. There's a bunch of it. We tried to simplify it and not put up too much text on here. We'll have this presentation available with full definitions after the fact. But just real quick, RGB, as you heard, it's a color system where red, green, and blue are separated into their own channels. And typically, if you're going to use like retro games, you're going to connect it with like BNC connectors or something like that. Chroma is color information. It's the color being sent through the video signal, and then luma or Y is the luminescence or the brightness or the black and white levels of a color signal.
Yeah, and since now you understand what chroma and luma is, that kind of makes more sense to the rest of the video connections that you use on your retro consoles. So component video is where luminance is separated, and then chroma is on 2 different things, red and blue. Green is figured out by math and combining all 3. As video is literally just separated luma and chroma, and composite is when everything's on the same connector. So that's why you'll see the biggest quality jump from composite to as video, because now there is some sort of separation happening, and then you just kind of tighten it in when you do more separation on top of that.
And the other thing to mention is sync. There's a synchronization signal that allows the TV to know how it's drawing the lines and stay in the right hertz and all that. But this comes in a lot of different forms, and there's a lot of misinformation, especially around C-Sync.
Yeah, because there's two terms that start with the letter C. There's composite video sync, which is where the composite video, you're pulling the sync information from that. There's also composite sync, which is when you take horizontal and vertical HV sync and you combine it together into one. And as you can see, it's very easy to mix up the two if you don't actually know which one is which. And the terminology is all over the place on the internet, which leads to a lot of confusion when you try to get into this. So we just wanted to mention it. Yeah, and Chroma Subsampling is something you may or may not have heard about. It comes back to that component video system where you have luminance and chroma. The easiest way to describe it is if you have 444 is everything is 1080p resolution, let's say. But when you start to get into like 422, that means that the luminance is the full resolution and the color is half resolution, which can, when you're watching videos and everything like that, you really won't notice it. But when you're dealing with retro consoles that have a lot of solid colors and really hard edges, it's kind of like it won't look as sharp because the color is not the full resolution and it's kind of an ugly overlay. So we'll talk about it a little bit more in detail, but it's just some more terminology. And then progressive and interlaced. Progressive is just the full video frame all at once, and interlaced is when it's every other line. And you've probably seen that on captures where everything looks like it's has like a combing effect if it's not deinterlaced properly. And that's just really what that is. And this is a quality comparison. We took a screenshot from My Life in Gaming's video here because it's just the easiest to do. As you can see, composite, everything's kind of smeared together. There's no hard lines, it's just all there. And then as video, you can actually start to see that there's hard edges around the pixels and everything like that. And then RGB just kind of cleans that up where there's less around it and it's just more defined.
Yeah, and again, the biggest jump is from composite to S-video. So now let's talk about some capture equipment. It's worth noting that, again, this is stuff that we feel comfortable recommending. Like you could put up Elgato stuff or Aver Media stuff here. But this, just to give you a general idea of kind of there's not really a fits-all need sort of thing, even though the USB 3 HD cap has a lot of check marks and everything. It does need specific drivers where, if one thing will start working, but you'll break another functionality. So it's not, even though it can do everything, it takes some setup to make it work.
It's a jack of all trades and a master of none, pretty much. And then you'll notice that there, at the very end, there's also the data path vision card. And with HDMI, it's not actually an HDMI video card. So depending on the source, the way that sources communicate between each other is will be like, okay, I am a capture card. I can go up to 1080p. And then your switch will be like, okay, I can give you 1080p. That's an EDID or EDID. The data path, since it's not an HDMI connector, it's a DVI connector, it doesn't actually communicate in that sense. So you can have situations where something's plugged into it, and it'll be like, all right, what are you capable of? And then there's no response back. So you'll either get a black screen or it might cap out at 480p. In that case, you need to invest in a EDID spoofer, which goes in between the two devices, and it will just always go, okay, I'm capable of doing 1080p, and then your switch will be like, okay, I will give 1080p, at which case the capture card will work.
An important thing to mention is that your prices may vary on some of this stuff. The data path is a really great example of this, where at retail it is $780, but if you get it on eBay, as we have done, I've bought 2 of them off eBay.
I've got one, and then I ordered more. Pretty much everyone on our staff has managed to buy one at this price. So
Right, and it has worked out for us. But the benefits that you get from paying full price is that you're going to get customer support, you're going to get warranties, and cutting-edge technology, which really means if you're plugging something into the data path and it doesn't work, you can then contact data path and say, hey, I need this to work, and they'll start supporting you.
that's actually how the cards work with RGB to begin with. One of my friends, Muff, he goes by, he bought the card, it didn't work with arcade hardware. He shipped them a copy of Magical Tetris Challenge in a pizza box. DataPath received it, they did a firmware update, they sent it back in proper packaging, but that's how it was able to capture retro consoles. And I do see that there is a question. We will ask for them to be at the very end.
Yeah, totally. Next, you're going to have to split that signal. Unless you're capturing a single-player PC game on the PC that you're playing on, you're going to need some sort of splitter, a distribution amplifier, something that gets the video from out of your, out to your TV and out to your capture card from the console. And some of these things, like for HDMI, it's not a big jump, even though we've listed it as basic, better, best. But for the analog side, things really do improve, especially in terms of like the equipment quality itself.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at the table, basic is a Y cable. That's pretty much the standard. Oh, I want to get into capturing. Go get yourself a Y cable. They're very cheap. You can even find them at dollar stores at times. Mm-hmm. But it's not proper, because really what it's doing is it's splitting everything in half. So you may notice that the brightness is lower or the audio is lower or anything like that. So while it works, it's very a Mickey Mouse situation. For better, what I've actually recommended is a VGA splitter with adapters. What I mean by that is when you take a bare bones VGA splitter, it literally just takes what you give into it and it splits it out into the exact same except in two. So if you buy adapters, for example, composite or S-video or component or RGB, and you feed it into that input, it will give an exact replica on two outputs. So as long as you've adapted it, it will work. They're very easy to buy on Monoprice and Amazon, and they will be a lot easier and cleaner, and it allows for an upgrade if you decide to upgrade your video quality at some point, because it will still work. The best is what we have is an Extron Crosspoint. This is industry AV equipment. It's very expensive. If you take a look at the pricing, it can go into the thousands of dollars. But because it's older analog, companies do not really deal with that anymore when it comes to, for example, a situation like this. If there's any in-house AV, they probably don't deal with composite video anymore, or RGB or VGA. Everything's on HDMI. So companies are offloading their equipment onto eBay, where you are able to buy it fairly cheaply for what it does, and they're rock solid. They just work.
So as we said earlier, there's different paths for different captures that you want, and your capture setup is going to change depending on what it is you want to capture. Capturing something like a Super Nintendo is going to take different hardware and equipment than, say, a modern console like the Switch. So for retro consoles, typically you're looking at something like composite, S-video, YPPBR, component video, or RGB. And for modern consoles, you're looking at either component or HDMI. From PC, we'll get into sort of whether or not you want to get into a dual PC streaming setup and what that entails. But again, there's no fit-all sort of process here. So let's talk about retro capture. And for this example, let's say that we want to stream A Link to the Past. So Super Nintendo and our tiers here are sort of a basic capture. You just want to get the thing up on the stream and get it streaming. Better capture, you want to increase your video quality. You want people to see really what's happening. And then the best capture is you're willing to drop the money to really buy the more expensive stuff.
So yeah, I mean, with the basic capture, you can get yourself a GV-USB 2. It's a very rock solid external capture card.
It's kind of replaced the Dazzle, which used to be sort of
anybody
the old,
remembers those.
the old mainstay. But this is better, more affordable.
Yeah, and then just the basic RCA cable, because it's cheap. The consoles, whatever's came with your consoles, that's probably going to be composite. And the total cost is relatively cheap, $36 to $45, depending on how you source your parts. Very affordable, cheaper than most games nowadays. So if you want to get into it, that's the cheapest way to get into it.
And we should mention that we're not really touching on sort of like monitors and what sort of monitor you're playing on, whether LCD or PVMs, old CRT or something like that, because we just didn't really have the time. So this is strictly the video capture side of it in terms of cost. So for better capture, at this point, you kind of look to move into S-video. Again, that's really the biggest jump that you're going to see, and it's not as expensive as getting into a full RGB kind of setup. So you can still use the GV USB 2, it's got S-video on it, or you could upgrade to a USB 3 HD cap, which goes by a couple of different names.
Yeah, pretty much there was one company that makes the card, Yuan, and then that got rebadged by a company called Micomsoft, got rebadged by a company called StarTech. So it's under a lot of different makes and models, but it's literally the same card, depending on if you have an internal or external. This USB 3 HD cap, it's the most readily available to get on Amazon. So that's why we have that specific model there.
And then as far as cables, we would recommend the Innovation S-video. I have these. They've been much better quality than other S-video SNES cables that we've tried. So that's the ones that we would recommend. And this setup, again, can run you anywhere between 80 and 215, depending on if you go GV USB or USB HD cap.
And then if you want the very best retro capture, you're going to have to plop down some money on a DataPath Vision E1 card. Again, you can either buy it brand new or you can buy it used. Probably want to buy it used on eBay.
Yeah.
The video signal, you'll notice that it can only handle YPBPR RGB. That's what you want to use if you want the best quality out of it. The splitter, you'd want to invest in an Extron Crosspoint. For about $50, you can get a model that actually Lurk owns. and it takes 2 inputs and 4 outputs.
Yeah, correct.
So it's very solid, will work all the time. Cable-wise, we recommend HD Retrovision cables that they make. You can buy them from various online retailers when they're available. They're solid, they just output component, and they just work. If you want to get into like the RGB SCART style stuff, the 2 most popular sellers are Retro Access and Retro Gaming cables. We've both used them, they work, but we really like the HD Retrovision cables for just the fact that you don't need anything extra. It's just all there. And the total cost can run anywhere from $260 to $890, again, depending on if you want to plop down the money to get that card brand new, which if you do, please let me know.
Yeah. So just in summary, you know, as far as the captures go, it's really about what kind of video signal you want to use for your retro capture. Again, if you want to just get something up on stream, you want to start doing some sort of randomizer thing on Link to the Past and all that, composite's going to be your cheapest option just to get it up there. S-Video if you want to improve that, and then component and RGB if you want the nicest quality.
And it's just a visual to show how the capture cards look like. As you can see, the only internal one is that data path. So you'll notice that for the more higher quality stuff, you are more than likely to need it to be internal in a desktop than for it to be external.
So let's talk about modern capture. These have the benefit of mostly using HDMI output, though some of them will still use component. But HDMI being a digital source means that it kind of either arrives at its destination or it doesn't. It's not like composite or other sources where you need to like dial it in and kind of make it look good. It kind of just arrives or it doesn't.
So when it comes to investing in capture equipment, it's really not about whether the capture quality itself. It's more about how reliable the hardware is and whether it's easy to use or not. I mean, there are improvements that we'll later go over that some capture cards are better than others when it comes to capturing HDMI, but for the most part, if you get something and it works, it's not going to be a major improvement over somebody else.
Yeah, so the results you're gonna see are minuscule, and it's really about the Chroma subsampling that happens, and whether or not it happens. You know, streaming in 444 is going to be slightly higher quality than 422, same as you know, streaming in 10-bit as opposed to 8-bit.
So we just have some visual examples here right now. This is from Wikipedia's page on Chroma Subsampling. As you can see in the color portion, there really isn't too much of a difference visually, but when you break it down into the black and white to show the differences, you can see that 444, it has nice clean edges, and then all of a sudden you get to 422 and it starts kind of staircasing because of that halved resolution, and then the more resolution that's being cut and everything like that. So as you can see, this is why they do that. Visually, you really don't see a difference when it comes to images like that. But when we get to the next slide and we get into more retro capture stuff, this is actually from a Virtual Boy. Recently, there's been a development where you can capture Virtual Boy video. There's a TV out kit, and people are noticing that their streams don't look that nice. So as you can see, this is if they were capturing it with the red and black output or a blue and black output and a grayscale output. As you can see, when it's on YouTube, YouTube does Chroma subsampling on all videos that you submit to it. And you can see that if there was the tint on top of it, because of that compression, it now doesn't look very smooth. But if you streamed it in black and white, there's no color to compress, and therefore it looks nice and sharp. Even so, there's that visual comparison there to show why Chroma subsampling is very important when it comes to retro capture. And this is just showing off 10-bit versus 8-bit. As you can see, 8-bit, it's more blocks of gradation, while 10-bit, it's a full gradient. You may actually notice this when you're watching cartoons or anime on TV or through websites. There'll be this sort of blocking that's happening, and that's because of its 8-bit color. So if you're playing video games that are sort of that cel-shaded color as well, you'll notice the blocking of gradation instead of a smooth gradation going on.
Yeah, so we have the same sort of tiers here, but again, it's more about like the hardware that you're getting and the quality of the hardware there. So starting off on a very basic sort of capture, the Aver Capture HD or again the USB 3 HD cap are really good choices here. The splitter is just a generic kind of splitter found on Amazon. But it's been reliable for us.
Yes. And The reason why I actually added in the Vga Capture HD card in here, it's an older card, but I've actually used it and it's been very reliable to me. It caps out at 1080p 30, but it has things like it's powered off of USB, it can record to an SD card, it has an HDMI output right on top of it. So if you're looking into like a very simple, I just want things to work, that is a very good capture card to get. It's there are better capture cards, but if you just want something that works, you don't have to think about it, it's a very good buy.
As for better capture, we recommend the Digit Now, which is sort of the unmarked Magewell card, which is an external HDMI dongle, which has worked well. It's not as pricey as the full Magewell. I think it's the difference of like $200 or so.
Yeah.
Or again, going back to the DataPath Vision, you do have to do that EDIT spoofing, but it does work very well. The Neotech 4K x 2K is sort of another kind of more generic splitter, but what's nice about it is that it has audio output via RCA, so you can kind of split the audio easier.
Which is actually a requirement when using the DataPath cards, because they do not capture any audio of some sort. So that's kind of a requirement to have audio broken out of your HDMI sources.
Mm-hmm. And again, this can run you the very full price if you go for that full DataPath cost there. Now we get into the best capture. This stuff gets much more expensive, and it's really about the fact that it can either do 4K or it can take multiple inputs rather than just one.
Yeah, and I mean, the Blackmagic Intensity card, it can do 10-bit capture, it can do the whole 444 capture, everything like that. And with companies like this, if something doesn't work, you can reach out to them. With the Blackmagic things, it's you probably won't be recording like Super Nintendo stuff off of it or anything like that, even though it has an analog input. It very much likes to stick with video inputs that are of some standard, but if you're going to capture HDMI stuff, it's a fairly solid card. So.
So just you know, as an example of, say you want to capture Super Mario Odyssey on your Switch or something like this, you just want to capture it, you can do the Vga Capture HD or the USB 3 HD cap, and that'll really just get it up there. But if you want to get more reliable card, or you want to run you know, multiple things at once, or upscale it to 4K for some reason, you want to go for more of those best captures.
Yeah.
Here's some pictures of these cards. The difference here is that this would say Magewell. So, and then these cards are internal.
Yeah, and like I was saying, with internal cards, you're more likely to get those higher quality captures because it is an internal card. It's not really limited by USB speeds.
Right. So now let's talk about PC capturing. PC capturing is more so a software-related process unless you're going to get into a dual PC setup, which makes this kind of the easiest thing to capture. The quality of your capture is really going to depend on the quality of your PC's hardware. Even if you have a second capture PC, your quality of that capture still depends on that second PC's hardware. So it's really about money that you want to drop on good hardware when it comes to PC capturing. So a single PC path is pretty easy. You're playing on the same computer that you're using to stream, and you're probably going to use either game capture, which allows you to capture games that are in full screen. It kind of injects itself as part of the DirectX or OpenGL to kind of capture the game. It doesn't really work for everything though, which is where Windows Capture comes in, which also doesn't hook, doesn't hook into anything, but it captures your window. But it is best to have Arrow enabled.
And the reason for that is if you have Windows Arrow enabled, you'll notice that there's transparency effects and windows can fly around and everything like that. When that's enabled, a program like OBS, if you tell it to capture this program here, even if you slide another program on top of it, because Arrow's enabled, it can see through it and you can still capture this. But if you actually have it disabled, the window capture is more just like a monitor capture that's been cropped. So if you slide anything on top of it, it will just start to capture the window on top. And it also is more efficient when it have Windows Arrow enabled. So that's why window capture works best with it.
Right.
And we will not be really covering how to build a computer to handle certain captures. Again, there's only so much time that we have here, and trying to focus on one single thing. We could probably do like a whole day's worth if we were trying to get into everything.
So streaming is just a very CPU intensive task, but somewhat recently there are some more hardware encoders that are being released, such as like NVIDIA's Shadowplay, this AMD Relive, and Intel's QuickSync that have these like specialized hardware encoders just for the purpose of recording video. But they don't work relatively well in terms of actually streaming live. They're much more better suited to offline and local recording situations because they don't offload the workload as well.
Yeah, essentially these hardware encoders, they're designed to local record, which means you don't really have a limitation on the bit rate to stream to or anything like that, and it can just throw everything that it needs to achieve the best quality recording. When we're streaming, we don't really have that option because nobody has gigabit to every single household, and even if we did, it could get kind of crazy there. So they're very good for example, if you want to do an offline recording to upload to YouTube at a later date or anything like that, but we don't really recommend it for streaming because it just, using the regular CPU will yield a much better quality with the same amount of bit rate. If you do want to use them, though, we have the names listed of how you can use them in OBS if you want to give them a tryout.
Yeah, because they're labeled as NVENC, VCE, and QuickSync respectively. So let's talk about the dual PC path. This is using a second computer with a capture card to handle the streaming and offset the workload from your main computer so that it can just handle the gaming performance going out. So in principle, this is the exact same thing as capturing a console, just instead of you're splitting the output from your gaming desktop. This is not like a cost or a space-effective method to get better quality because you're adding a whole nother PC to your setup, requiring another keyboard, monitor, the whole thing. It does, however, let you achieve maximum graphical fidelity in your games, since you're not eating up some CPU resources and things to actually put out the stream and do the video encoding.
Yeah, it pretty much boils down to, let's say you're playing, I don't even know, a decent PC game. Tomb Raider is a decent PC game. If you want to have your stream show that you're playing the game in maximum quality, you have every single option enabled. It's in full 1440p because that's what your monitor can handle. You just want to max it out. You won't be able to do that if you're streaming on the same computer. You'd have to maybe bump it down to medium or something like that to be able to stream at the same time. So if you wanted that maximum graphical fidelity, you would need a second computer to record what your first computer is doing. And you'll actually often find that at marathons or speedruns events, it's very common to use a dual PC setup for a multitude of reasons. The first is the graphical fidelity that I was talking about. And the second is that it allows you to multitask. People can install games on that computer while the other computer is doing a stream. If the game crashes and causes a blue screen, the stream doesn't go down or anything like that. So that's why often at events you will see that they use a dual PC setup.
And this is from Twitch. It's sort of their explanation as to how this is taking place. So just to give you sort of a visual. And then this is Twitch's dual PC example as far as hardware goes. It's a little slightly dated, as you can see from the graphics cards. But what is important to note here is that the streaming computer does not need the sort of graphical performance that your gaming computer is going to need. But it is going to need a CPU with like as many cores as you can throw at it, really. The more, the better.
Yeah, and it also, even though this is slightly dated hardware, that's a good thing for most people. It means that the computer that you have laying around is probably good enough to be able to pull off something like this. Even if you have like an older computer that somebody's thrown out, if it's a decent quad core and you wanted to do the dual PC setup, you can probably get away with using it.
Mm-hmm. Like you can drop money on a Ryzen Threadripper and get or go for like a server build with dual CPUs and all that. But you don't necessarily need that. So let's talk about marathon setups now, getting into larger scale, bigger things. And in this sort of capture setup, you really need to ask yourself 4 questions. What is your team's ability? Like how many physical folks do you have? What is their knowledge base? How much are they going to be able to troubleshoot hardware and capture things if they don't go right? How portable do you need to be? Are all the staff local? They're all going to come together. You have access to all of your stuff at home, or are you flying, halfway across the earth to someplace else, and you need to bring all of this equipment with you?
Yeah, and third question is, what do you need to be capable of capturing? So what we mean by that is, if you're running an event, you are taking in submissions for games. You need to put some sort of criteria then on what submissions you're going to allow. Are you going to allow races? Maybe only cap it to 1v1 races. Maybe you'll have a 4-way race. Maybe you only allow consoles that have composite capture. Maybe you only allow modern consoles because you only have HDMI equipment. It's setting a criteria of what you want to be able to actually capture for your event. And the last is obviously, what is your capture budget? Since you probably need to invest in some equipment, maybe you don't, but how much money do you have available to pull this off?
Yeah, and once you have those answers, then you can really talk about what level of quality you want to offer. Are we going to go the full RGB perfect setup, or do we need to sacrifice quality for portability and just, stream and composite? So let's give some examples of that. Let's say you have a 3-person team who is working over the span of a weekend. These 3 people are pretty knowledgeable about everything, but it means that they're going to need to be portable because all of the staff are going to fly in from a very long distance away, possibly by the ocean or something like that. You need to be very portable as everyone's coming together. And what are you capturing? Let's say you're going to capture some SNES games, some NES games, N64, and your outlier is you got 1 Dreamcast submission. So you got to take that into consideration. And then you have 1 race. Let's say it's a Super Nintendo race. You got, Super Metroid at the end of your marathon. And then what's your capture budget? You got $500. Not a huge amount to work with.
Yeah, and again, this is strictly the capture budget. This doesn't take into account audio or venue costs or anything like that. It's just how much money you have towards the capture. So what we recommend is actually a laptop, some form of modern quad-core, an i5 or better. Something with a dedicated graphics card to do like your compositing for the stream itself, decent amount of RAM, so 8 gigs. It's very possible that somebody on your team actually already owns a laptop that's this capable, which means that you can skip it and you can move that money towards something else. But if it's going to be a portable thing, nobody wants to fly around with a big desktop, a laptop is the way to go. You can actually get away, however, with 2 GV USBs. We have confirmed that you can use multiple instances of the same capture card on 1 piece of hardware. I actually have confirmation that at one point people had 4 working at once. So if that's something you want to do, you can. Splitter-wise, something very portable and packable. So that would be the Vga Splitter solution that we were talking about earlier. It's very compact with all the adapters and everything. And you'd probably want to stream at 720p, 60 frames a second, because your quality is really going to cap out at composite or as video. You can really stream at 3,500 kilobits a second, and that will give you a very high quality stream for what you are getting out of it.
So let's get a bigger example. Let's say you have a 8-person team and you're working over the span of a whole week. In this case, you don't need to be as portable as a lot of the staff are local, although some of them are flying in. And let's say this time, instead of just like old digital sources, we now have some, or old analog sources, we now have some digital sources. So NES, SNES, N64, PS4, Switch, and PC. And in this case, you have 2 races. You've got a SNES race and you have a PC race. But this time you also have a much bigger budget. You've got $2,000 to work with.
So in that case, you would want to get a desktop. That would open up your options. You can maybe look into some internal cards. You can get yourself a dedicated graphics card that will more than likely be a lot stronger than anything you can find in a desktop, at least in the previous price range. You can pump more RAM into it. Video capture device-wise, since you may or may not have the money to buy modded consoles to have them RGB output, but I mean, the Super Nintendo has RGB output by default on most models, but something like an NES or an N64 may require modifications to get that. They aren't overtly expensive, but maybe it's something you don't want to get into. In either case, as a quote-unquote one-size-fits-all, what we're actually recommending are 2 RetroTink 2Xs and the 1 DataPath Vision E2S card. The E2S card is literally the same as the E1 card we were talking about earlier, but it has 2 capture inputs on 1 card. So instead of buying 2 E1 cards, you can buy 1 E2 card, and that will get you through there. The RetroTink as well is literally just a little small scaler. It takes in composite SVideO component and it spits out 480p video for flat screens or capture cards. So splitter device-wise, you're going to want to get in something a little bit beefier than the Vga Splitter solution. That's where an Extron Crosspoint comes in. You can buy a bigger model if you have the space for it, or you can buy a smaller model. You can just buy whatever kind of fits your needs there. For the modern sources, you can just get away with an HDMI splitter. Maybe you want to up that HDMI splitter to the one that breaks audio out if you're going to use mixers or anything like that and you want to do something towards there. But since everything is a lot beefier and your capture is going to be a lot higher quality since you're going to be diving into the component in RGB, you're going to want to up your stream to show that off as well. So you can start to stream at something like 1080p resolution at 60 frames a second at 6,500 kilobits a second. You can probably get away with more, but Twitch's recommendation is to not go over that amount, so that's what we've kept that amount to.
And now, just to give you a non-hypothetical example, this is sort of how NASA has answered these questions in a real-life setting. So our team's ability is we have a four-person team working over the span of a week. Most of our staff are local due to our venue choices because we need access to some local equipment. What do we need to be capable of capturing? Like literally everything we've captured, so everything, because we allow all submissions. And then what is our capture budget? It's really zero. Like everything that we do comes out of pocket or is like grassroots, community funded. Shout outs to George, Motion, and Bing Chang for bringing stuff to our events that we ended up needing as essential equipment. But if we did total up our total equipment cost, it'd be around $2,300.
And the reason that we kind of get away with that is the streaming computer is my computer. I took in the time and effort. I need an upgrade. I specifically built a computer that would be for the event. And when it comes to the capture cards and everything like that, our purchases or what we'll use at home will also be used at the event. So that's kind of where our line of thought goes in there. The current server that we have is codename Artemis. What it entails is older server components. So it has dual Xeon 2680 V2s. What that means is that it has 20 cores inside of that one computer. It has a dedicated 1050 GPU because it was new at the time, and it allows kind of to do the crazy NVIDIA stuff if we want to get into the local recording aspects. It has 32 gigs of RAM with the possibility of upgrading, so it's a very beefy computer. It's still not fully spec'd out, and it can do everything that we need it to do. Currently, our video capture devices is I actually own a Vision E2S, and between the rest of the staff, we have a couple E1 cards. And recently, I've also come across buying a Magewell Quad HDMI capture card. So currently, even without all of our combining of capture hardware, the computer itself has 6 inputs, and it can go up to 8 inputs. Or more, which allows for 4-way races, multiple cameras, having consoles always plugged in, so that way you don't have to swap cables around. So it has the possibility of more growth because of that server components there. We also use the RetroTink 2Xs and other various hardware, but that's kind of hard to get crossed by, and honestly, I'll probably be moving everything to the RetroTink 2X for their size and portability, and that will allow us to get those odd cases where RGB or component is not available on an older console. It will still let us capture composite or as video through the current equipment that we have. The Extron Crosspoint that we have is actually a 128, meaning that it takes 12 inputs and it can spit it out into 8 outputs. So that way we can do our quad races, and it can have a feed for the TV and it can have a feed for the capture card. We can have up to 12 inputs in there, so we can have multiple consoles hooked up at once. That specific model as well, it allows for controlling over Ethernet, so you can have a tablet or a computer hooked up and just boop, and there you go. The scene is changed, all your captures are set up. We use basic HDMI splitters. There's nothing fancy about the ones that we own. They're the exact same models that we talked about earlier, and they do as well. We will be streaming at 1080p resolution, 60 frames a second. We're going to be maxing out Twitch's capabilities with the Streamwise. And our previous VODs, actually, if you look them up on YouTube, they're actually recorded in 1440p quality, just a step below 2160 or 4K. And if you look at it on YouTube, there is a significant graphical improvement when you look at the videos. Even at 1080p, things are kind of muddy. You switch it to that 1440p and everything is nice and crisp. So that's why we made sure that our hardware is capable of doing that. Potentially we'll be able to record or stream in 4K. The hardware is more than certainly capable of it. It's more limitations outside of our control.
Right. And it's worth noting that, we've been building it up since 2016, so it's really evolved since then.
This has been like buying it piece by piece over months at a time. I'll be staring at eBay for like 4 months, and it's like, oh, that capture card is now on sale. I'm going to attempt to grab it. Yep. So it's a lot of staring at auctions and other resources to try and piece together what we want. And this is just, again, going over that RetroTink 2X. That's a picture of it there. It's literally like the size of a credit card. It just uses USB power. And again, it takes in those kind of retro, older video signals, and it spits it out into HDMI, so that way you can use it on modern TVs or capture cards.
This is relatively new hardware.
Yes, it only came out last year, 2018, but only a few months ago, so.
Yeah. So we're going to give a couple shout outs to folks who've been, helping us, build up our knowledge base and helping with our setup and everything. So shout outs to the ESA Tech crew, Edenol, Planks, Oasis when he was there.
Yeah, and I also have a Discord called R3, the RGB Retro Resource. There's a lot of knowledgeable people in there, such as Muff and Extrems, who makes Game Boy Interface. He's in there as well. A lot of knowledgeable people in there, and all we literally do is talk about capture. Literally before this panel, I was talking with Bob from Retro RGB about his Sega Genesis capture. That's all that happens in there. Shout outs to the Retro Roundtable with that video that we had, and that also being super knowledgeable and talking with us and going over things like that. My Life in Gaming, they are also super cool people. If you want to kind of get more into video signals and maybe figuring out what the best capture per console is, they have a whole video series on that, going over what console has the best outputs, what to kind of look into and invest in. The slow-mo guys for the video that we had showing how TVs work, and Games Done Quick for the opportunity to have this panel and present it to you guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us. And also, if you want to join that Discord, you can go to r3.fyi. That's also a growing wiki resource that we have for, these scalers, these hardware on everything. If you want to check out NASA Marathon and what we're doing, you can go to nasamarathon.com. If you want to check out any of my bullshit, it's at lurk.mo. And if you want to follow either of our Twitters, they're right down there. Does anybody have any questions at this point? We can start. There's a microphone over to here.
Yes.
If folks want to line up for that.
Clearly into the microphone, so that way we can listen to it back when the recording happens.
Of course, the microphone's on the complete other side. So I arrived a little late. You talked about the RetroTink. Did you talk about the OSSC at all?
No, and the reason for that is actually, and this is a lot of contention with even people from the Retro Roundtable and other people, the OSSC is actually not required in our setups, because the reason the OSSC has a very good video capture is because when we break down into the video that we played, where it shows that video is built like kind of piece by piece, line by line, the OSSC, you fine-tune that specifically to the console. So this is when you get into crazy things like H size, like this 320 by 240 video feed from this console. Its video signal is actually 427 samples wide, and that creates the pixel perfect stuff, and it gets into a lot of crazy video signal stuff. But the OSSC is fine-tunable to that extent. But so is the data path capture card. So the only thing that an OSSC would actually do in our setup is just, instead of us fine-tuning it with a remote and fiddling around with the OSSC, we just do it with the Windows program on the computer. We have everything saved as presets. So if I want N64 capture that's pixel perfect, I double-click my N64 preset. It pops up in a window that we window capture, and it is the exact same quality as the OSSC. The only difference between the two is that an OSSC has something called a low-pass filter. And what that does, it kind of cleans up the video signal a bit if there's any noise or anything going along with that. But as the video clip showed, Voltar is actually working on a capture unit for the data path cards that will have a low-pass filter on a switch to toggle between the two. So that's very soon going to be a non-issue.
And are these slides going to be posted?
Yes, we are going to be sharing these slides after the fact.
Hi, guys. Thanks for the presentation. Very helpful. I just have a question about the EDID spoofer. What does that look like? Does it have toggleable resolutions?
So-
And can it be used with the OSSC 5X scale?
So I don't know if it would actually help with the OSSC 5 scale, because the way that the OSSC works is what comes into it comes out of it. So if you're feeding something like a Super Nintendo, its refresh rate is not to any specification. It's outside of it. So when the OSSC does a 5 times scale on it, that video signal is absolutely out of any specifications. So an EDID spoofer won't necessarily help in that sense. But to answer the other part of the question is what it looks like. The ones that we actually own, they're little HDMI dongles about yay big. They're about the size of a thumb. And it literally just has an HDMI plug on one end, and that's male, and a female end on the other side. And it just brute forces a 4K EDID. So anything that you have in between it, it will think that it's hooked up to a 4K TV. Now, there are more advanced EDID spoofers. For example, if you start getting into Extron equipment or anything like that, those have dip switches that allow you to switch between different displays and different resolutions to kind of brute force into. But in our case, they're not really required.
So the basic dongle, once it forces 4K, will allow anything below that as well. Like
Yes,
720p.
exactly. And the reason that they're super important in our case is the most recent NASA event, in trying to up the crowd cams and everything that were going on, instead of using a webcam and running into all the issues that has, the limited cable length, the fact that it can't extend, the fact that webcams' video qualities are kind of iffy to begin with, we actually moved into using GoPros and action cams, which have a lot better low light performance when you're in a room like this. They output a full HD signal of 1080i, which is perfectly fine for something like a crowd cam. It's proper 60 frames a second, so you won't have any stuttering or anything like that. But the problem is with our capture cards, because they don't have that EDID, they would only output in 480p, which is kind of garbage. But putting an EDID spoofer in between that allowed us to get the full resolution out of those cameras. And you will most often find that issue with cameras, but again, with something like a PS TV or with a Nintendo Switch, they're looking for those EDIDs. So if your capture card doesn't have one, then it won't work. For example, the Live Gamer Portable that I was mentioning, that Aver Capture HD, it actually has its own EDID because it has that HDMI pass-through. So that's, when I didn't have a spoofer at the time, I would literally just chain my capture card in between it to make sure that I could capture properly from my other capture card. There was some capture card inception happening there, but.
And last question, about how much do one of those run?
You can find one on Amazon for about 20 Canadian. If you have quick postage from China, you can probably get them for around $5.
Awesome. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you. And all right, if there's no other questions, we just...
no, we do have
we
a
do have a
question.
question. Sorry.
The tech guy.
desk. Yeah. So you mentioned the Blackmagic cards. I know a lot of people have complained in the past about reliability with those. I know I've always had a good idea, but I wondered if you guys had any issues with them or any solutions that came out from that.
So it comes down again to everything has to be a specific specification of the signal. Extrems actually has a Blackmagic capture card, and he actually tests his crazy GameCube video stuff that he's doing with a Blackmagic intensity card. So most recently, he actually came out with a solution that allows a GameCube to output in 1080i. So you can use that with GameCube games, or you can use it with the Game Boy interface. It forces the GameCube to output 1080i. There's some video magical stuff going on there where it's still using the same bandwidth available, but it's a lot of video signal crazy stuff. The important thing is that he managed to tune it so something as picky as his Blackmagic capture device actually recognizes the video signal from Game Boy interface in 1080i, and it works properly. So I think a lot of reliability issues with those cards comes down to the fact that everybody's pumping non-standard video signals into them. If you wanted to pump in a modern capture card, or not a modern console into it that is very strict in its video signals, because it has to be HDMI specification, or if you wanted to use it with a camera or anything like that, there should be no reliability issues with it.
Cool, thanks. And I guess a second question would be going with specifically, I guess, 4-way HDMI capture. You mentioned that you got a Magewell quad HDMI capture as well, but you also had multiple cards in the past. Would you generally recommend going with multiple cards or a single multi-capture?
This is the thing when it comes to multiple cards. The reason that we have that server set up is because it has 6 PCIe lanes into it. Because there's 20 cores, 2 CPUs, we don't end up getting bottlenecked by the amount of PCIe lanes that we have. So oftentimes when somebody buys a DataPath card, they plug it in, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because their graphics card is taking up 16 of the available slots, and that's actually pretty much the most that Intel CPUs have on them. So if your graphics card is taking up all of them, the capture card is not going to work. So you have to swap it around, bump the graphics card to 8, which opens up 8, which means the DataPath card can take up the 4 it needs. So with the server setup, we were able to do races like that because we had 5 inputs going on. But because they're single capture slots, that means all my slots are used up on a single form of capture. So using the quad HDMI card, using just 1 slot, I have 4 captures instead of using up 4 slots for 4 captures. So if you have the capabilities and your hardware supports it, I would definitely look into grabbing those quad HDMI cards. I know that GDQ actually uses those quad HDMI UON cards, as far as I know, unless they've upgraded and that. But I know that ESA also actually uses the quad cards for HDMI. I think they've actually also started to invest into quad SDI cards. And it's just, it allows for you to pack more into the one system than you normally can, because instead of it taking the 4 slots, it takes up 1 slot.
Perfect, thanks.
Yep.
Are there any more questions? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. And we'll try and get a big link out for this whole, for all of these slides with the full definitions of some of the stuff at the beginning for all of y'all. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
And if you have any future questions, just feel free to ask me and lurk outside the panel room, or join the Discord again if you have any questions and didn't want to come up to the microphone.
Sure. Thanks, y'all.